All right, we're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the Real Help webinar series. We've been running for the past couple of months, and just a couple of guidelines. If you have questions that you would like to ask, type it into the Q&A box, and I will be able to see them and read them to the presenter. But right now, I'd like to get started, and this is our monthly webinar series, and it's Understanding and Supporting Grief Together. Our presenter is Ulyssa Lopez. She's a licensed social worker and also a program director with Real Help. She leads telehealth, behavioral health programs, and is dedicated in creating a safe, culturally responsive space for healing. And with that, let me bring on Ulyssa.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. Before we begin, I just want to share briefly why this topic is important to me, and most importantly, just why it matters, just as not just as a clinician, but as a human being. So, throughout my career, I've had the honor of sitting with people through some of the most painful and transformative moments in their lives. And what I've learned is that grief is not, it's the least understood, but yet something that all of us experience on a universal level. I've seen people grieve quietly while the world expected them to keep moving. I've seen people apologize for their tears, question themselves, why am I not over this yet? When in reality, they are navigating something profoundly human. And I've learned that grief isn't a topic we talk about enough. We rush past it, we minimize it, we judge it, or we hide our own grief because we think it's too much for others. My hope today is simple, that this space feels grounding, compassionate, and it's validating. That you leave here feeling less alone, that you feel more equipped, not only for yourself, but for the people that you care about. So thank you for showing up today, for giving yourself this space, and for being a part of this conversation. Let me share what we'll explore today. Here's the roadmap for our time together. And we're going to move through it slowly, intentionally, and without rushing anything. First, we'll talk about what grief really is, beyond the narrative or beyond the narrow definition that many of us were taught. Grief is not just sadness, and it's not just death. It's complex, it's a complex emotional, physical, spiritual, and behavioral experience. Then we'll explore the different types of loss people grieve, including the losses that often go unrecognized and unsupported. We'll take a look at the nature of grief, how it behaves, why it feels unpredictable, and why it often appears in waves rather than stages. We'll break down some common myths that create shame or pressure and talk about how these myths show up across families, cultures, and generations. We'll explore coping strategies that help the nervous system and the heart navigate grief. We'll talk about how to support someone who's grieving, what to say, what to avoid, and what meaningful presence actually looks like. We'll pause for a moment for a guided reflection and then end with resources you can use for yourself or share with others. Throughout the day, feel free to use the chat or the question and answers box. You can write down your reflections on a paper and pen. We will do a lot of reflection throughout this entire presentation. So, or if you just like to just sit with it and observe how you're feeling, just take all the information in. Everything is optional. This space is meant to support you, not overwhelm you. And to help us arrive fully in this space, we'll start with a grounding moment. Let's take a moment to ground ourselves before we begin. Grief lives in the body, so grounding helps us kind of settle before we get into the learning that we're going to do today. If you're comfortable, place your feet flat on the floor. Rest your hands gently at your side. Take a deep breath in through your nose and exhale through your mouth. Let's do that again. Inhale and exhale. A good rule of thumb is when you're exhaling, pretend as if you're blowing out a candle. Let's do that one more time. Inhale and exhale. Now I just want you to notice one sensory detail around you. It could be a sound that you're hearing in your room, the temperature of the air that you feel, the way that your chair may be supporting you right now, or the texture of whatever your hands are touching. Just notice it. We're not trying to change anything about what you notice. Take a minute to just hone in on that one thing. If your mind is busy, that's completely normal. If emotions are present, that's normal too. If you feel nothing at all, that's also normal. This grounding moment is about arriving as you are. I'll give us a couple more times to breathe in and out. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Now that we're settled, let's talk about what grief actually looks like. Many people hear the word grief. They immediately think of death. And while death is a major source of grief, it is far from the only one. Grief is our natural response to losing something that mattered. It affects our emotions, our energy, our identity, our routines, and even our nervous system. Here's an example of what it can look like in everyday life. I feel fine all morning. Then I walked into the kitchen, saw his coffee mug on the counter, and it was like the loss hit me for the first time all over again. That's grief. Grief speaks through unexpected tears, numbness, confusion, irritability, difficulty focusing, exhaustion, or feeling like you're watching your life from the outside. And grief isn't only something that we feel after the loss. Sometimes it begins before the loss even happens. And that's anticipatory grief. Examples of anticipatory grief are caring for a declining parent, sensing a relationship is ending, preparing for a medical change, or noticing that a loved one is slowly becoming someone different. That kind of grief is heavy because you're trying to hold love, hope, fear, and preparation all at the same time. What's one thing people often misunderstand about grief? I want you to take a moment to sit with that for a second. What's one thing people often misunderstand about grief? Whether that have been in your own experience, maybe some misunderstandings you've had before in the past. Grief is not a single emotion. It's a human experience. And understanding that gives us more compassion for ourselves and for others. Let's build on this by talking about the different types of losses people grieve. Grief comes in many forms, and naming them helps people feel seen. There's death, so the loss of someone we love, family, friends, partners, mentors. This grief can be expected or unexpected, sudden, peaceful, or traumatic. There's relationships ending, breakups, divorce, estrangements, or friendships fading. Sometimes we're grieving the person. Sometimes we're grieving the future we imagined with them. Someone once said to me, it wasn't just losing him, it was losing the life I thought we were building. You might have some health changes, a diagnosis, chronic illness, or physical limitations can change how we see ourselves. Identity shifts, becoming a parent, losing independence, changing careers, leaving a community, stepping out of a role we built our identity around. We grieve who we used to be. And there's the loss of safety or stability. Things like financial strain can happen, moving, losing a home, experiencing a trauma or discrimination. Even when the crisis passes, the body feels the impact. We also have the dreams and expectations, the life we imagine. So that's plans, milestones, or goals that didn't unfold the way we hoped. You might have heard of terms like ambiguous grief, when someone is physically present but emotionally or mentally changed. Examples of this can be dementia, addiction, incarceration, or a mental illness. There's also disenfranchised grief, loss that society minimizes or doesn't acknowledge. These include miscarriages, the loss of your pet, fertility challenges, losing a job, losing a spiritual community. People often grieve these silently. We also have to take in cultural grief variations. So some cultures grieve publicly and communally, others grieve quietly and privately. Some honor long mourning rituals, while others expect quick recovery. There is no one right way to grieve. What is a type of loss you think people don't talk about enough?
Hey, Ulyssa, let
Yes.
me just jump in real quick. Some people are raising their hands. If you have a question, type it into the Q&A box and we'll get to it right away.
Do I have access to the chat on my side too? Or just you can see it?
I'll manage it.
Okay, no problem. All right. So we were at thinking of what is a type of loss you think people don't talk about enough, whether that's a loss that you've experienced that you felt like people didn't talk about enough, you weren't able to feel supported. You can either write this down, sit with it with yourself, and just take a moment to reflect. Now that we've explored,
While you're reflecting, I do have a question. What should I say or avoid saying to someone who's grieving?
well, we are going to get into that. I have a whole slide about what to say, what not to say, languages to avoid, and how grief just in general speaks different languages. So we'll get right into that. You stick around.
Thank you.
I see someone else. I see actually hand raised on here. So I don't know if that function, I should be exiting out of that. Okay.
Yeah, don't worry about that.
Okay, no problem. All right. So now that we've explored the many forms of loss, let's talk about how grief actually behaves because it rarely feels predictable. One of the biggest misconceptions about grief is the idea that it follows a straight line or even a predictable set of stages. In reality, grief looks a lot more like waves. Some days the waves are gentle. Maybe just a memory comes up for you, maybe a small ache, a moment of missing just kind of enters the room for you. Other days, it can feel like a full tidal wave that hits without warning. And that doesn't mean that you're going backward. It means you're human. A real world example of this that someone once shared with me was for months, I felt like I was doing okay. Then I was grocery shopping, past the cereal aisle, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. I had no idea a box of cereal could bring me right back to that loss. And you know what? That's how grief works. It attaches itself to the ordinary moments. Triggers can include music, anniversaries, seasons, transitions, holidays, even joyful moments like birthdays or promotions. The nervous system plays a role. When we lose someone or something significant, our body stores the emotional imprint. So when something resembles that loss, your system responds as if it's happening again. But here's what I want you to hear clearly. A resurgence of grief does not mean you're failing. It means your love, memory, and humanity are alive. Grief doesn't disappear, it evolves. It changes shape. It shifts with time, with perspective, with growth, and it remains part of your story. What's one word that describes how grief has changed for you over time? Think about that for a second. What's one word that has described how grief has changed for you over time? Words like maybe it's become softer, sharper, maybe it's gotten confusing, or unpredictable. Sit with that, whatever does come to mind. Now I want to introduce a concept that helps people make sense of this. The idea of growing around your grief. You don't get over grief. Grief doesn't shrink. Your life grows around it. This concept is powerful because it challenges the belief that grief eventually disappears. We don't outgrow grief, we grow around it. The grief stays the same size, but our world expands. New relationships, new experiences, new strengths, new meaning. All of these things grow around the place where grief lives. I want to invite you to do a brief visualization with me so that we bring this concept home. Imagine, you can actually, during this visualization, you can imagine this or you can write it down on with a pen and paper. You want to draw a small circle in the middle of a page, and this symbolizes your grief. Think about a page, think about a circle in the center, and that is your grief. In the beginning, the circle feels like your whole world. Once it happens and you're going through the motions, this is what it feels like. It feels like my entire page is just this grief circle. But over time, more circles get added. You have a circle for connection, you have a circle for purpose, healing, growth, resilience. Your world gets bigger. Your capacity gets bigger. But the original circle of grief is still there. So if you're writing these down, draw some circles on your page that signify things that have happened for you, that have gotten added since your grief. You'll notice that it's not the only thing on the page anymore. So your grief remains, but it's not the only thing on the page. Your world is filled with other things. Someone once shared with me, I used to feel guilty when I laughed again. It felt like I was betraying my grief. But over time, I realized laughter didn't mean the loss mattered less. It meant my world was growing around it. And that's exactly what we mean by growing around grief. So whether you're someone who wrote this down on a paper or you thought of this, what are some things that have grown in your life since your loss? Did you develop a new strength? Did you establish a new boundary with someone? Or have you just gotten a new sense of self? Think about that for a moment in your own life. Now let's shift into a very grounding activity, one word check-in about grief. This is one of my favorite grounding activities because it brings the emotional truth of grief into the room without needing a full explanation. Take a moment and think about one word you associate with grief. It might be heavy, it might be peaceful, it might be lonely, it might be transformative, it might even be contradictory. That's normal. There's no right or wrong word here. I'll give you a few moments to yourself. Write down your one word and think about what this word means to you. As these words come in, notice something. As these words come to your mind, I want you to notice something. And that is that grief speaks many languages. No two people experience it the same way. Yet these are patterns we all recognize. Whether your word is hope, pain, confusion, strength, gratitude, or numbness, it belongs here. And this reminds us that grief is not one-dimensional. It's layered, it's human, and it's deeply personal. Now that we've grounded ourselves in the emotional reality of grief, let's talk about some of the myths that make grief harder to carry. This slide is important because Myths are often what hurt us more than the grief itself. Let's let's break these down one by one. Time heals all wounds. I know we've all at one point heard this, whether it be in our lives, in a movie, in a show. We've all heard this before. Time doesn't heal all wounds. What we do with the time matters. Time alone doesn't heal grief. People often say this because they feel uncomfortable witnessing pain or they want to offer hope. But healing takes support, expression, coping tools, and connection, the permission to feel a lived, and the permission to feel. Someone once told me, I was waiting for time to magically fix it, but time just made the silence louder. What helped was talking about my grief with someone who understood. Another myth you see here is you should move on. This usually comes from people who haven't experienced deep grief and who are uncomfortable with emotion. The truth is, you don't move on, you move forward with grief. It becomes a part of your story, but not your identity. Strong people don't cry. This myth comes from culture, family norms, or generational trauma. Crying is a release, a pressure valve, a biological function. Tears are not a weakness, they're evidence of love and humanity. And this last one here, grief looks the same for everyone. No. Some people cry, some people become quiet, some people get angry, some dive into work, some socially withdraw. You might even find that some can laugh through it, or some don't feel anything at all. All of these are grief. Additional myths that I do want to bring up are only certain losses deserve grief. Some of us might have heard this before. That's completely false. Every loss has meaning. Or if you're not crying, you're not grieving. Tears are one expression, not the only one. Or grief ends at a year. Anniversaries, birthdays, transitions, and milestones can bring fresh waves for decades. You can gently challenge these myths by saying things like, grief doesn't operate on a timeline. What you're feeling makes sense. Your way of grieving is valid. Healing isn't about forgetting. Which myth have you heard the most? Or which myth did I mention today that you felt the most pressured by? Have you ever said or thought of one of these myths? Let this resonate with you and reflect for a moment. Now that we've unlearned some of these myths, let's talk about let's talk about the tools that actually help the healing. So the coping tools. These tools are not about rushing grief or fixing it. They're about supporting the nervous system and the heart while you move through it. Let's break these down with some real life examples. So grounding and breath work. That's easy enough, right? So one of my favorite grounding, I have two favorite grounding techniques. One that is very liked by people is the 10-second grounding breath. You inhale for 4 seconds, you hold for 2 seconds, and then you exhale for 4 seconds. Let's try this together. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold, exhale. Those of you who don't like to count while you're breathing, another good example could be for some quick breathing exercise would be creating a triangle. So as you inhale, you're going to draw one side of your triangle, and as you exhale, you're going to draw the other two sides of your triangle. You can do this with your finger as well for a visual. So you inhale, exhale. Again, you inhale, exhale. If you want even more of a visual, some people like to imagine the line that they're drawing with their finger is a color, whether that be blue, white. It's just something to kind of create that space and bring you back into the present. Those are two quick grounding techniques, 10-second grounding breath and the triangle breathing. Other coping tools here we have journaling and expressive writing. So through this entire presentation, you'll see that we have been reflecting, we've been writing things down. Some people like to write a letter to their grief. Some people like to write to the person that they lost, or just writing down things that they never got to say to this person. Someone once shared with me, journaling helped me stop carrying everything in my chest. So you'll find that through journaling and expressive writing, we can sometimes have all these feelings in our chest, in our hearts, in our heads. When we remove them, we physically remove those things and put it on a paper. It causes us a great relief to have them. Then we have rituals of remembrance. This can be lighting a candle, creating a memory box, cooking a loved one's favorite meal, visiting a meaningful location. Or one of my favorites is listening to music that reminds you of this person. Rituals create the connection. It's not a regression for you. A coping tool that gets forgotten about a lot is healthy boundaries. So grief often amplifies emotional sensitivity. Boundaries protect your time, your energy, and emotional capacity. So examples of a boundary you can place is saying, I can't talk about this today. Or you might limit contact with emotionally draining people when you're just not in the mood. Stepping back from responsibilities temporarily. So if you have a lot on your plate and you need to kind of step back for a moment, being able to check in with yourself and have those boundaries, that is a really huge coping tool for you. And as we learned earlier, how grief lives in your body, movement in nature is gonna help. Movement, even the most gentle walking, helps release some stored emotion. Nature provides grounding without any judgment. Some people like to go out and have a barefoot walk in the grass. Some people just like to go out for a walk and have a mindful walk where they'll notice all the colors that they see, or they just mention, you can get really creative with these things, whether it's noticing your colors or maybe even going out and saying, I'm going to spot everything that starts with the letter A, just to kind of get out and get grounded in that way as well. A big one and huge one is community support. And that's because we heal in connection, not in isolation. This includes your family, friends, support groups, faith communities, or therapists. You do not have to process grief alone. Did any of these coping tools stand out to you? Are you curious to try any of them? Um, if you like, you can write down a few that you want to try. You can think about a few that maybe this next week that you'll try. With these tools in mind, let's shift to something equally important: how we support someone else who's grieving. One of the most powerful things we can do for someone in grief is to show up without trying to solve anything. Most people say the wrong thing, not because they don't care, but because they feel uncomfortable witnessing sadness. So let's break these things down. Listen without fixing. Sometimes people just need a witness. They don't need advice. They don't need a plan. They need someone willing to sit with them in the discomfort. A client once said, the best support I got was someone who didn't rush to make me feel better. She just simply said, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Validating feelings. So, validation might sound like, what you're feeling makes sense. This sounds incredibly hard. You're allowed to feel exactly what you feel. Validation is going to help create emotional safety for this person. And we also want to offer specific help. General offers like, let me know if you need anything, often go nowhere. And as we all know it, people who are grieving are overwhelmed. So it's really important to show up in these conversations, being specific. Can I bring you dinner on Thursday? Do you want me to take the kids for an hour? Do you want any company while you run errands? And that one's big because even the smallest tasks feel like lifelines. Avoid minimizing language. So And these phrases often come from discomfort, not cruelty, but you may have said things like, at least they lived a long life. At least you have another baby. They're in a better place. Stay strong. Minimizing is invalidating, even when it's well intended. So, a quick example of what support versus unsupportive things may sound like. If you're being unsupportive, you may say something like, I know you're sad, but you have to move on. Everything happens for a reason. Supportive sounds like, I can hear how much this loss changes has changed things for you. You don't have to rush your feelings. I'm here with you. And now the only difference really between these two is your presence and how you're showing up in these conversations. Another thing to note is cultural awareness and how that matters. Some cultures, again, like we've said before, encourage open expression. Others expect you to have quiet strength. Some value community mourning, while some value more privacy when they're mourning. Knowing someone's cultural background helps us support them without imposing our own expectations. Now we're going to get into
Alyssa,
some.
we have a question, if I could throw it out there. What is the
Yep.
best way to discuss a person's grief if they don't even want to acknowledge that they're grieving, but you can see it's impacting their life?
Yeah, that can be tricky because people can experience waves of denial. So it's really just important to meet the person where they're at. We cannot we cannot impose too much. Then it risks the person kind of pulling away, shying away. So what matters, especially in this moment for someone who's grieving, is your presence. Showing up. Showing up, showing that support is going to mean everything. You don't have to show up and know all the tools that you have to present. Sometimes people just need you to sit with them, need that one-on-one time. That is going to make the most impact.
Great, thank you.
Welcome. All right. So now let's talk about something people struggle with, that is finding the right words. And this is going to go into your question that you asked me earlier about, and I mentioned that there will be a slide on grief language. Language matters, not because we need to be perfect, but because when someone is hurting, even small words can land deeply. So if you look over at my helpful examples, so I'm here with you. This communicates presence, not pressure. Your feelings make sense. This validates their internal experience. Take your time. This removes the timeline that we often place on grief. Unhelpful language, like first anything that starts off with at least, is usually going to minimize the grief. So sentences like, at least you're young, at least you have other children, or at least it wasn't worse. If you're starting a sentence with at least, you probably should repair from that. Grief doesn't respond to silver linings, it responds to compassion. And now I say repair because there is repair language when you say something wrong. We've all done it, What matters is what we do after and how we try to repair. So you can say things like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to minimize your grief. Thank you for telling me how you feel. I'm here. Or let's try that again. What you're going through is real and it matters. Repairing is going to help build that trust again if you've found yourself in the unhelpful column of things. I want you to take a moment to think to yourself, what's a phrase you wish people said more often to grievers? For yourself, what's something you wish someone said to you? Take a moment just to think about that. What's something you feel like you would like for people to say more often to grievers? Did we have another question? Because I did see a hand get raised before I move on. No? Okay.
No, I mean,
No question
if
then.
you have a question, you have to type it into the Q&A. We can't respond to the hand raises on this particular app.
Okay. All right. So we're going to move on into a moment of reflection together. And this is where I would invite you to grab a pen and paper so that you can have some time to yourself to reflect on this. This reflection is meant to give you gentle space to check in with yourself. If you want to participate, you can so You can do so internally or you can do so in writing, as I said. Dear grief, today I want you to know. I'll give you a couple seconds with that. Dear grief, today I want you to know. Maybe you want your grief to know that you're tired or that you're healing. You might still be angry. You're learning, or maybe you want to share that you're learning to carry it with more compassion. There is no right way to do this. I'll give you a few more seconds to hold this quietly with yourself. And you know what? If it feels grounding for you, you can place your hand on your heart or place your hand on your stomach. Just notice any emotion, tension, or softness that might come up. And as you're placing your hand on your heart or on your stomach, I want you to also just consider when you feel these emotions of grief, where do you feel your grief? Do you feel your grief in your legs, in your knees? Do you feel it in your fingertips? In what moments do you feel like you are experiencing grief? And how is your body responding? Before we move on, I do want to do some deep breaths. We'll take 3 deep breaths together. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Last one, inhale, exhale. All right, so we're going to shift over to some resources that can help you beyond today, help you or someone that you love. Right, so I've broken these resources down into 3 different sections. We have national resources listed here. We have specific for Massachusetts resources, and then we also have some online communities and tools. These are not affiliate with Real Help. We have no affiliation with these. I just wanted to give you guys some resources for you to take. If you'd like me to email this to you, I can do that as well. At the very end, you can shoot us an email and I can let you know the resources that I was able to find. So 988 is the Suicide Crisis Lifeline. Here we also have things like the Grief Share, virtual support groups. For Massachusetts, we have the 2 different helplines. And then also, if you're in Mass, and you can check out your local hospital and see if they have any free grief groups. I know that Bay State, Bay State does have them. If you check their community programs, you can get connected to some of their support groups that are happening. And then online, you have the access online to things. The Refuge in Grief is really good. It's a validations-based grief resource. As you're taking a look at these resources, though, I do want you to think to yourself, when it comes to support groups, right? Sometimes we don't know the first step to take. Taking that first step to get yourself into a support group can feel like really overwhelming. Think about the following questions. Do I want structure or open conversation? Do I feel more comfortable in a group or do I want to have a one-to-one? Do I want something culturally specific? And do I want a group for my type of loss? The goal is not to replace your grief. It's just the goal is to support it. So think about those things when you are choosing a support group that feels best for you and when you're doing your own research.
Ulyssa, I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you help with grief when you might have similar grief or might have a loss before or after someone close to you?
So how do you deal with grief when you have like a similar grief? I'll get to that
Yeah,
part
that's what,
first.
yeah.
So that basically, it's important to be transparent. It's important to know for yourself how you can show up. Sometimes, we can't give 100% when we are also experiencing that. It's just important to give yourself that grace, remind yourself that you're human, but show up in the way that you can and what feels good for you. So that's be a lot of checking in and just a lot of awareness for yourself. If something is feeling overwhelmed, if you are feeling like you're drowning in someone else's grief, it's important to just kind of take some space for you and do some things that will ground you and bring you back to the present. So that will just again be like a lot of checking with yourself as far as when you're experiencing the same type of grief, and you might even be experiencing the same grief together. And just know and understand that every grief is going to look different. So you may have experienced a certain way and reacted a certain way. Someone else will have it the complete opposite of the spectrum. So just being open to how everyone grieves in their own way. Literally, everyone grieves in their own way.
Thank you. There's also been several questions. Can I get this slide? I'll let it, this presentation, the entire presentation is being recorded. So if you send me an email after it converts and it's done, I will send you a copy of the slides as well as the video presentation.
Good. All right, so I want to go ahead and share a few books that resonate deeply with people who are navigating grief in my next slide. Now, again, these books have no affiliation with Real Help. These are just books that have been mentioned that seem to help people. So these books offer different perspectives and can meet people at different points of their journey. First one, It's Okay That You're Not Okay, validates grief without rushing healing. A Year of Magical Thinking is a raw and honest look at the mind in grief. Permission to Mourn encourages compassionate self-permission in grief. And then Bearing the Unbearable, a deeply spiritual and emotional guide to carrying profound loss. You certainly do not need all of these. Each one can offer language, support, and understanding. So these are just a few options for you. And now we're going to come to our closing. Before we go on and close, do we have any other questions?
Just someone wanted my email address. It
Okay.
is GDORSI@ne-family.com.
Anything else?
That's it so
All
far.
right. Right. Sounds good. All right. So as we come to the end of our time today, I want to thank you truly for being here. Grief is something that connects us all, but it often isolates us. Just by showing up today, you reduce that sense of isolation for yourself or for someone you care about. So I want to invite you to one last long, slow breath. Inhale and exhale. Notice what shifted for you during this session. Maybe you learned something new, maybe something resonated deeply, maybe something in you softened. Whatever came up, it's all valid. I encourage you to stay connected with your support system and to use the tools that we explored today. Healing is not about erasing grief. It's about learning to live alongside it with gentleness. The resources we reviewed are there for you whenever you need them. And before we sign off, I like to ask one final reflection question. What is one thing you're taking with you from today? Think about that. What is one thing you'll be taking with you from today? Thank you so much for showing up for yourself today, for showing up for your community, and thank you for allowing me to hold this space with you. You matter, and your grief matters, and your healing matters as well. Have a great day.